It's now my sincere pleasure to introduce the keynote for our Uncommon Collaborations panel. You can find the bios of all the speakers in your programs, so I'll be brief whenever I'm introducing someone. I'm really excited, though, to introduce Jeff Dunn. He is the president of Campbell Fresh and the former president of Bolthouse Farms. He may be most well known for encouraging us all to eat baby carrots like potato chips, but it's really his journey from Coca-Cola executive to corporate food visionary that I'm most inspired by. I'm really, really excited and honored to have him here to talk about his own thoughts about sustainability in the food system and what sorts of uncommon collaborations are needed to help companies, farmers, and advocates all work together. Following Jeff will be the panel on uncommon collaborations, which will be moderated by April Fulton. Don't forget to use the hashtag foodtank and ask questions at questions@foodtank.com. Please join me now in welcoming Jeff to the stage.
Good morning, and welcome to everybody who's watching on the live stream at home or at the office as well. You know, my talk this morning is going to be about uncommon collaborations, but before I get into the meat of the conversation, I want to share with you how I think about this issue with the food system. My own journey, my arc, if you will, from Coca-Cola. And when I say I started in Coca-Cola, my father worked for him for 47 years, so I was kind of born into the Coca-Cola family, to Carrots, the Bolthouse Farms, and then to Campbell's has really been a reflection, I think, of the journey we're all on relative to the food system. A journey from, food that was great, was interesting, was well branded, but maybe when we think about the arc of the food system, things that were created for convenience may have gotten a little ahead of themselves, and there was a whole series of unintended consequences. So we've got some health considerations that are very real when we think about our food system today. We've clearly got sustainability issues, and ultimately, we've got a food system that needs work. I think you would all agree with that. So as I think about this arc, starting with Coke, then for the last 8 years, being a large-scale farmer with Bolthouse Farms, and then 3 years ago we sold our company to Campbell's, and part of the transformation of Campbell's, that arc actually reflects my own thinking, which is really that what we have to do on a planetary basis, on a global basis, is reinvent our food system. We need to reinvent it for health, we need to reinvent it for sustainability, and ultimately we need to reinvent it so that there is complete transparency. My belief is that reinvention will come out of uncommon collaborations. It won't be any single sector that addresses this problem. It will be all of us working together. It's one of those problems that takes all of us working together. And sometimes when you think about business and government, NGOs and superpowered individuals, they tend to be viewed in isolation. And the secret, even going back to my days at Coke, who's a leader in sustainability, I think has done a very nice job there. The old days of collaboration, 20 years of doing it, I'd fly around the world and I'd meet with governments and I'd meet with NGOs and activists, and we'd work on problems, but we do it in a conference room, or we do it in a field, or we do it face to face. And the shift that has happened in the last 10 years is that conversation, which used to be face up, is now about a digital conversation. It's both meetings like this, but even the live stream aspect of this changes the nature of the conversation. And I think it's an incredibly important, incredibly dynamic aspect of what's going on. The arc from face-to-face to digital, the arc from kind of a brand-centric view of the food system to a systemic product, health-oriented view of the food system, and ultimately the consumer being empowered to make better decisions about what food they eat and what they provide their family based on better information at the point of decision. This arc is really about empowering the consumer to make those decisions and to value brands and companies and institutions that support that. So as I think about uncommon collaborations, I want to put one person or one group at the center of that. And that's all of us. We talk about people, we talk about consumers. Use any word you want. We deserve a better food system. We deserve better food policy. We deserve our kids to be able to have food, whether they're in Camden elementary schools where our Campbell's is headquartered, or the best private school in Westchester, New York. Everyone deserves a healthy food system. And so as we think about these uncommon collaborations, putting all of us at the center, the question then becomes, how do we light those uncommon collaborations up? How do we translate those into positive action? I love Danielle's opening. I'm so pleased to be here with all of you because you are those superpowered individuals who are making change happen. We won't do it by simply staring at the problems. We'll do it by putting people together, focused on solutions, with a maniacal energy around action. And so as I think about the arc from Coca-Cola to carrots to Campbell's, I obviously like alliteration. At the heart of it, my current company, Campbell's, a 150-year-old company, in some ways is at the forefront of this change. We've redefined our purpose as real food that matters for life's moments, starting with real food. And we're taking significant actions in the marketplace to make that purpose come to life. We talk about this millennial moment. Millennials, I love them. I've got two. I don't know about you. I've got a 28 and a 30-year-old. And they challenge me every day. They challenge me to think differently about how do we create the conditions so when they have kids and their kids have kids, we can not only feed them, but we can know that they're going to be healthy, that they're going to be vital, they're going to have the energy to be able to accomplish whatever it is they want to accomplish in life. So that arc of uncommon collaborations is one today that takes on a new sense of urgency. So as I think about how to light those uncommon collaborations up, I want to give you a couple of examples of things that have happened to me just in the past couple of years. We have spent a lot of time studying the intersection of food, agriculture, and technology. I deeply believe that the solutions to many of these problems will come out of a more Silicon Valley view of the problems. We're in the midst of building out our own knowledge in this area, but at the heart of it, being in California, I have a little advantage over most people. I've been in and around Silicon Valley for 20 years. I have a lot of friends there, and the thing they do that maybe some of the players who've tried to collaborate on these issues, including big companies and small companies and governments, do differently, is they stare at the problem and they say, it's fixable. And maybe they worship technology a little too much, but I don't think so. If you put the consumer at the middle and you say technology is an enabler and it can create this conversation and this set of conditions for uncommon collaborations to translate into marketplace actions, the role of technology is critical, and it starts with transparency. We're very committed at my company to creating a fully transparent view of how we operate. No one's going to agree with everything we do. It's the nature of business. We have shareholders, we have profit and loss, but at the heart of it, we want to be transparent about what we do and be honest about it. Because we won't always agree. Business is both part of the solution and part of the problem. But at the heart of it, if we're transparent, if we're engaging, if we look for collaborations and we enable those collaborations to get to scale through technology, all of a sudden we think the solutions become more clear. And for me at least, the heart of this kind of meeting is the face-to-face connections that then translate into the digital connections. And you know what's fascinating? I've been doing this for a number of years. And in the beginning, my friends at Coca-Cola talked about competitive advantage, and that was the analogy or the the metaphor for competitive advantage, which was taught in every business school in this country, was to build a big castle on a hill, high walls, deep moats. And the thing I'll tell you about technology is, and I said this to our board a few months ago, I said, you got to take the walls down and fill in the moats. The strength of uncommon collaborations, the strength of the system is no longer the size of your walls, because people get bigger ladders. It's the strength of your network. It's the power of your network. It's the connections in your network. And it's the alignment of your network around a set of values and beliefs and maniacal focus on taking the network to solve the problems. So as I think about collaboration, people sometimes think a little kumbaya and we all share the same goals. I don't think about it that way. I think it's the fuel to fire that's going to allow us to solve these problems. And I'll end where I started. All of us deserve a healthier food system. All of our kids deserve good, solid nutrition every day. And we can solve that problem. But as Danielle said, it's going to take maniacal focus. So for me, I say, help us help you. Happy to engage any way you want to find ways where we can bring that maniacal focus to action. Thanks a lot.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your moderator, April Fulton, National Geographic.
Morning. You all awake? Well, we got a lot of warm-ups to begin with, so hopefully this panel of 6 people will be a lively experience for you. Thanks for the introductions. I'm really happy to be here today. There are a lot of reasons why National Geographic is very interested in food, and I run the food blog, so I'm here. But we really try to focus on the interaction of food and health and environment and people and tell stories about improving the food system through all of you. So I'm really happy to be here. So there's 1 billion people hungry in the world and 2.4 billion people that are overweight. We're losing forests and ice caps at a pretty rapid pace. And these are big global problems that require a variety of uncommon collaborations to solve, as you heard from Campbell's. From NGOs and governments to corporations and animal rights groups, educators, farmers, there are a lot of opportunities to come together. Today on this panel, we're going to hear about getting better food to jails, about collaborations to eliminate coffee rust, about improving the production of maize crops in Africa, about replanting cocoa, and about the role of food waste in making food better for all of us. So I want to start by not sitting here and introducing all these panelists, but just kind of jumping into a conversation because you all have their bios in your information. But I will just start in order because that's the order we are in. My first question is for Jason Clay. He's the Senior Vice President of Food and Markets and Executive Director, Markets Institute at the World Wildlife Fund. Jason, and I love this because your bio says you get things done on a global scale. That sounds like something you might want on your tombstone at some point too. not anytime soon. Not soon. But you get things done. He recently teamed up with Mars and others to map the genomes of 100 of the most important neglected crops in Africa. And the plan is to put the information into the public domain and train plant breeders to help increase productivity. And I wanted to ask, first of all, how does a nonprofit like WWF go about collaborating with big corporations like Mars and other companies that don't seem to be obvious collaborators?
So over the last 10 or 20 years, we've come to realize as an organization that if we don't get where and how we produce food right globally, we won't have a planet that has biodiversity and good ecosystem functions. So we identified the 15 most important crops that are threatening biodiversity, and then the 100 companies that touch about 25% of the trade of all 15 of those crops. And we then set out to start partnering with those 100 companies. And we work with about 70 of them today on their supply chains, looking at both risk, environmental risk, impacts, et cetera, but also long-term availability of those products. And I think in the case of Mars, we started first with seafood because that was something they cared about. And in case you don't know, Mars actually sells 4 times more seafood, or buys 4 times more seafood than Walmart does. And they use it for pet food. And we got working on that, and then we worked on the 10 to 15 most important crops where they were either big to the crop or the crop was big to them, and looked at how they could start thinking about shifting their supply chains, making time-bound commitments towards certified product, et cetera. And then they started looking at the data from certification programs, and they realized that the certified producers had the exact same levels of stunting and malnutrition with their children as non-certified producers. They're saying, we're not going to buy certified poverty. And what they meant by that was they didn't want programs that were not actually helping families have a better life. And so we sat down and we said one of the ways to do this is to help them produce more food with their traditional food crops. And that's where we then identified the 100 most important food crops. We got about 350 plant breeders in Africa to opine on this and to rank these. We started with about 600 crops and ended up with 100. We've almost finished the genomic mapping. It's all in the public domain, all that's been done. Nobody can patent it. And we're training about 35 to 40 farmers or plant breeders a year to actually turn this into planting materials for farmers. Our goal is to help the regions that are going to produce, that are going to have more people and more income and more consumption, produce the crops that they know better.
So it's not just world wildlife and
No, it's
Mars, it's also the people in the country.
It's NEPAD in Africa, it's IBM, it's NSF, NIH, it's Pioneer DuPont, it's a bunch of different entities that are uncommonly collaborating. That's what we call it. Our interest is to keep the Congo Basin forested, to keep the Serengeti in grassland. We don't want to see all this turned into farms.
So one of the important things is to get buy-in from the people on the ground, which leads me next to Bill Burke, sitting next to you. He's a research scholar at the Center on Food Security and Environment at Stanford. I know it's early in the morning for you right now, so we appreciate your being here. We're going to start a little slow. Bill, you're next. 2 West Coasters are next to each other. Bill works on solving hunger, poverty, and environmental issues, and he's done a lot of work in Africa too. And earlier this week, he shared with me a story about how important it is to work with partners who know the audience that you're trying to reach. And that he told me about maize crops improvement in the year 2010 in Zambia, and he was about to give a presentation to the Zambian Minister of Agriculture, but he downplayed a very important part of it that would have gone very badly if he had not worked with some other people to change his presentation. Can you tell us a little bit?
I can. So when I arrived in Zambia, I lived there for a couple of years. I came in on the heels of, which at the time was their biggest harvest in history, by far. That year it was over 2 million tons, which hadn't happened yet. And so a big question was, where did this come from? How did, Zambia actually tracks their production much closer than most African countries. And so the question was, how do we have all this maize all of a sudden? And, so we got all the data that the government had collected. And after, months of analysis, the main conclusion was that the biggest difference was very favorable weather, which made perfect sense to me.
So nothing you guys did, it was like...
Well, yeah, that's what I learned was not a good thing to say when you're talking to a bunch of policymakers. You didn't do this.
Right.
Because the government's main focus had been promoting fertilizer use. For those who don't know, African fertilizer use is very, very low on the scale of 10% of what you see in the developing world, and that's on average. The majority of African farmers don't use any fertilizer at all. So the government had put a lot of effort into promoting fertilizer use, subsidizing the price of fertilizers, et cetera. But it turns out that, looking at a year-to-year change in production isn't probably the best way to gauge the effectiveness of fertilizer, right? Because it didn't change much from one year to the next. And so the question that I was asked is, where did this change come from? And the answer was kind of unfavorable, or favorable weather.
The rain.
The rain. And I was talking to some of the technocrats who are friends of mine in the ministry before we went and presented this material, and they said, you can't say nothing about fertilizer. Not that what we found wasn't valid, but if you want to be part of the conversation, you have to know who you're talking to. So working with the politicians or the people in politics that I knew there, we kind of reframed the conversation so that we could be part of it, and that our results wouldn't get lost, because it was an important message that you had great production this year. That's fantastic, and your efforts and the efforts of all the farmers should be lauded for that. But it also highlights the vulnerability that you have to bad weather. And what we know about climate change, our expectation of what weather is going to be in the future is highly uncertain. So that was an important collaboration, that I'm trained as an economist. I wasn't trained as a politician, so I wouldn't have known what to say.
You had to learn a lot about fertilizer.
Well, and that's the other thing is, so then the question becomes, well, if our fertilizer isn't as effective as you say, why not?
Right.
And I at the time, completely unqualified to answer that question. So I started working with crop scientists in the country. The Zambia Agricultural Research Institute was a government body that I spent a lot of time really studying with and learning a lot about what it is that makes plants grow and what makes fertilizer effective or not effective. And so learned a lot about soil quality. Soil acidity is a big problem in Zambia. And in a lot of tropical regions, for those who don't know, if soil is acidic, meaning a pH level lower than 7 is technically acidic, lower than 5.5, you get this scientifically shown threshold where plant root growth is highly stunted, limiting the plant's ability itself to uptake nutrients. But you also find a different chemical reaction taking place in the soil when you put fertilizers down. The technical phrase is nutrient lockup, right? So the phosphorus, for example, one of the nutrients that plants consume in the highest quality or use in the highest quantity, rather, becomes the type of phosphate that plants don't take up. So you're putting phosphorus on the ground, but it's not going anywhere, least of all to the plant.
So now you're going to be a fertilizer expert, right?
I hope so. I don't have any wood to knock on.
Aspirational.
But yeah, no. So, I'm still an economist, but I work a lot with crop scientists, soil scientists, and so on. And that's the sort of thing that I would not have expected to be doing when I went to Zambia, but it's become kind of the real main focus of a lot of the work that I do. And that's why, really, I was very happy to take my position at Stanford at the Food Security and Environment Center, because it really is, everybody talks about, multidisciplinary work, but that really is, I work with lawyers and doctors and crop scientists, other economists, mathematicians, to kind of bridge these gaps as much as we can. And if I can kind of plug this conference itself, I think it's a great thing when we get something like the Food Tank Summit out here, and it's a great thing, I think, to start with this panel, because you really should take the opportunity to go outside your box and go to the presentations that you're not comfortable with and you don't necessarily understand everything that's going to be said going into it, because there's a lot to learn from leaving your own discipline, I found.
I think that's true. So academics can work together with just about anyone to make something happen.
I wasn't going to say it.
I'm going to skip over to Pam just because we're talking about Africa and soil right now. So Pam Fessenden is the director of the Office of Market and Partnership Innovations in USAID's Bureau for Food Security. It leads the Feed the Future program, which is the U.S. government's global hunger and food security initiative. And Pam has worked a lot with the private sector and others to link farmers to markets and bring innovations to tackle tough challenges to reduce poverty and nutrition. And one of the things she was mentioning to me earlier that she's been working on is attacking coffee rust in Central America. And I wondered, fertilizer, coffee. That's the segue, Pam.
Okay, I can
Work with it.
Sure. Is this on?
Yeah.
Can't tell. Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, April. Yeah, as she mentioned, I work for the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is the lead agency among 11 that leads the Feed the Future initiative. We work with other agencies in the federal government, including the State Department, USDA, Commerce, OPIC, et cetera, et cetera. So the example of an uncommon collaboration that I wanted to highlight, I've got a couple in my back pocket, but one I wanted to highlight was the work that we've done with the coffee industry, with an impact investor, with the IADB in Central America to help.
What's IADB?
Inter-American Development Bank.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I do a lot of acronyms. I'm with the government, so sorry. Not as many as the military, though. So anyway, so the challenge was in 2012, an outbreak of coffee rust, or roya, hit Latin America more broadly. And we work in a few countries in Central America, including Guatemala and Honduras, where the outbreak was quite severe. There are climatic reasons. I mean, we talked a little bit about climate change and the impact that it has on agriculture. For certain, that is having an impact on the coffee sector. And you'll see disease outbreak maybe increase. It's not a new disease, but an increase. So it was the hardest. They were the hardest hit, the worst outbreak in I'm not even sure how long. In any event, there are Feed the Future focuses on reduction of hunger, poverty, and undernutrition, really with a special focus on smallholder farmers and in that subsection, women. So anyway, with coffee farmers, there are 25 million smallholder farmers involved in the coffee sector globally.
Those are farmers who don't have a lot of land, right?
Sorry,
this
yes,
is like the
yes.
favorite acronym of the
Yes.
day, or
Yeah.
abbreviation of the day, but smallholder farmers.
And there are debates about
Small farmers.
small farmers, the very, very
Not in
small plots
stature.
of land. Yeah, very small plots of land. Usually with not a lot of resources. A lot of them are subsistence farmers, not exclusively, but a lot of them are. In any event, so the coffee farmers impacted by this this outbreak. One of the things that needs to be done is planting of new trees and trees that are resistant to the disease. And the challenge is that farmers, these small-scale farmers, don't have the resources. They don't have the resources to take out loans in order to be able to invest in the purchase of the trees and the time that it will take for them to be yielding the beans again, et cetera. And oftentimes they don't have access to credit. So then you have on the other side, on the commercial side, you have the coffee companies that are looking for consistent, sustainable sources of coffee. And so I think the uncommon collaboration that I wanted to highlight here was these coffee companies, competitors, fierce competitors normally, got together in a pre-competitive space and decided that they were going to team up with, amongst themselves, with USAID, with Root Capital, which is the impact investor, and the IADB, and help these farmers have access to capital. So to be able to take out longer-term loans, to be able to buy and plant and take the time that it'll take for them to repay those loans. Because oftentimes in the agriculture sector, credit is extended for very short periods of time, and the challenge is that repayment periods usually don't coincide with harvest and the time that it would take to repay those loans.
So how did it work? Did the Feed the Future initiative connect the companies that wanted the coffee with the farmers who are growing it to get them salaried or something, guaranteed income?
Yeah, there are 40,000 farmers who now have access to credit to be able to do what I just explained. So it's a combination of an alliance between USAID, the companies, and there's also a credit guarantee, a loan guarantee. So that component is built into it as well. So it's a de-risking of the potential credit risk. So de-risking that.
Okay. And I wanted to go to Alexander Müller right now because he has good questions about these kind of collaborations. Alexander heads up a UN environmental program project called the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity for Agriculture and Food. TEEBAgFood, that's a real acronym. That is a real acronym. So he basically gets farmers, economists, and business people, and doctors and scientists together. And one of his questions about these kind of collaborations where you get the companies in earlier is, how can you guarantee that the farmers are going to get something out of it?
Thanks a lot for this question. What we try to do is to develop a common denominator where all the actors of an incredible complex food system could work together. The challenge so far is that the work in the food system is organized in silos. You have the farmers, you have the environmentalists, people processing, distributing, stores, consumers, the health system, and overall, this system is not sustainable. To give you 2 examples, we are currently producing enough food to feed the world. Around 1 billion people are hungry. What people often do not know is that 2/3 of these hungry people are living in rural areas and are farmers. But what a crazy situation. People producing food, mainly in developing countries, do not have enough food to feed their families. So something is broken in the system. On the other hand, we are throwing away 1/3 of all food being produced. 1.3 billion tons of food being thrown away every year. So every 3rd acre of land is used to produce food waste. This just doesn't make sense. And therefore, in order to fix the problems my fellow panelists have mentioned, we need kind of a common denominator, because the food system is not governed well. It's driven by vested interests very often, and we do not really know the exact or the true cost of our food. The food in our supermarket seems to be very cheap, but in the long run, it can be quite expensive because we have food-related health problems like diabetes, for example, or we are destroying the environment, and the current price is not reflecting the true cost of production of our food. And this creates problems for the farmers. Farmers working in a sustainable way get the same amount of money for their produce as farmers who are mining nutrients. So they don't benefit from their sustainability. And one of the main issues is how to avoid losing biodiversity, how not to destroy genetic diversity we need for adaptation in the future. All this has to be put together in a project, and we call it the true cost of our food, the economics of ecosystems, biodiversity for agriculture and food, to generate a platform where all the different partners could agree on and work together. Working together is one of the big challenges. If you focus only on producing more cheap sugar, you might be successful. But on the other hand, you will have more diabetes in human health, and therefore creating this platform for a new collaboration, for a new partnership, that's what we try to support.
Well, that's a great intro for the next 2 panelists I wanted to introduce. I'll just have to make a decision. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Amanda Oborne is the Vice President of Food and Farms at Ecotrust, and she's also connected with Food Hub, which is a website out of Portland that connects farmers, ranchers, and fishermen with each other to create networks. So a lot of our panelists have been talking fairly broadly about the kinds of collaborations we can do to solve some giant problems, but Amanda is one of the people who actually connects the actual people doing the actual work to try to get some changes. And she was going to talk about a program to get better food into the cafeterias and jails.
Thanks, April. And that actually was a great introduction. Those issues of the true cost of our food and the issues of food system being siloed is one that we really wrestle with at Ecotrust, and believe that some of the best solutions come at a regional scale. So I appreciated everything Karen Washington said this morning about needing small business and jobs and community engagement and culture and humility and common sense. We feel like a lot of those really holistic solutions and integrative thinking can happen at a regional scale because we have the ability to work with lots of different partners in healthcare and in food system and distribution and infrastructure and all of those pieces when we work at sort of the broad community level. So as April and I were talking about a little bit earlier this morning, my team and I joke that we're some of the few people out there that are trying to break into jails. Most people are trying to get out of there. We convene a network of food service directors at institutions. We've done farm-to-school work for many, many, many years and learned that a lot of the barriers to being able to source really good food from within the region, in any region, wherever the institution is, the barriers are the same at schools, at hospitals, at corporate cafes, at jails, at assisted living centers, specialty and event venues. If you're running a food service operation, you need huge volumes, you need really reasonable pricing because you're used to what comes out of the global industrial food system. You don't generally have the labor. You're dealing with minimum wage and living wage issues, so you need food to come in pre-processed. All of those barriers are very similar across institution types. So we've started a collaborative of food service directors and staff at institutions to bring them together. It's a peer-to-peer network. We go visit farms together. We go visit each other's kitchens. We do a lot of on-the-ground troubleshooting, problem solving on the bus, here or there, going to check these different possible solutions out. And just 2 weeks ago, we went to visit a jail that is just breaking the mold entirely in my mind. It's Stafford Creek Correctional Center in Aberdeen, Washington, which is the childhood home of Kurt Cobain for the Gen Xers in the room. It's out in it's a small town, fairly remote in Washington State. And this jail is part of the Sustainable Prisons Project, so they're making an effort to reduce their own waste and use good food and all this sort of stuff. And the food service director there is just a very average Joe guy. In fact, his name is Joe. And Seahawks fan, just doing his job, and really is a hero in my mind, just a superhero in the way that he has, in some cases, circumvented the group purchasing agreements and things that he's beholden to in order to work directly with farmers.
Are you finding that they have to do that a lot in order to get,
Definitely. All of these institutions deal with a lot of regulations, hospitals and schools and jails in particular, lots of regulations, very tiny budgets. And this guy, Joe, believes that these people matter and that they deserve decent food, and his job is not to punish them. There are people in his coworkers that have that job. His job is to feed them. And he also has become very smart about exploiting one factor that very much works in his favor that is unlike any other institution, which is that he's got unlimited free labor.
So they can help chop carrots and
he
dice
buys
onions.
all of his potatoes from a farmer whole and fresh. So all the hash browns, all the French fries, all of that stuff, those guys are out there. And trust me, I walked through this kitchen on a very long tour and saw the incredible security risk of having inmates with knives. They have to check out the knife, and then the guard
They have a system for
tethers it to a cutting board, and once everything's safe and secure, then the inmate steps up and can chop, and the thing is only 18 inches long, so he can't get out of hand. It was a fascinating tour, but what these guys have been able to accomplish is really amazing, and if they can do it there, you can do it in a lot of other places.
So they're not only feeding them fresher food that's not traveling from millions of miles away, but they're actually possibly giving them some job skills for when they do get out of jail, they know how to work in a kitchen.
And on top of that, Joe has a counterpart on the outside of the building, a guy named Ed who oversees the facility.
Joe and Ed.
Joe and Ed, they're amazing, I'm telling you. Ed put in a lifer garden for the inmates that are there for life. It's a very therapeutic thing, obviously. It is the most pristine, gorgeous garden I've ever seen in my life. These plants are babied like none other because these guys got a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it's a really rewarding, fulfilling thing, even in the pouring rain of coastal Washington.
So what I hear you saying is there's a lot of institutions that there's similar challenges with many institutions, but there's unique aspects to each one.
There are some real bright spots.
Again, know your audience, Bill, right? Just making sure you're paying attention. Okay, Okay, well, I want to introduce last but not least, Miss Diane Hatz. She's the founder and executive director of Change Food, a nonprofit connecting people who produce and care about good food. And she does this through events and projects aimed at educating and exciting consumers, sometimes computers too, perhaps. You know, I said computers because I was thinking about your executive production before all this with the viral Matrix videos, which you all must have seen. One thing I thought was really interesting about the development of the Matrix spoofs is that you were reaching new audiences and finding new collaborators to work on the issue of factory farming and animals. So can you tell us a little bit about how that began and then how it's informed your work going forward?
Sure. Thank you, April. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. And I just want to thank Danny Greenberg and everybody at Food Tank for putting on this event, because I think these events are so important. So if you don't know what the Matrix is, it came out in 2003, which is a very, very long time ago when you think about computers and tech. I started off as an advocate, and I was working with a group of farmers around the country that would go in local communities to hold factory farms accountable or to help stop factory farms from coming in. I did this for a couple years, and there are people who still do it. There's a organization called SRAP, it's the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. They still do that. It's very hard work. It's very depressing. When you get out into rural America and you see how animals are raised, it really does affect you. So after a couple years, I just felt, as someone who came from the music industry and the marketing background, that we weren't going to be able to get to the general public if we continued to be depressing and if we continued to just say bad things. So I was given the opportunity to found this program called Sustainable Table. So what I wanted to do was to educate consumers simply about issues with industrial agriculture and our broken food system. So while I was doing that, I thought, I can't just tell people about problems, I need to offer people a solution. So we also started developing the Eat Well Guide, which is still in operation. You put in your zip code, it brings up farm stores, restaurants, and all these other outlets that sell sustainable food around the country and in Canada. You can even, if you're going on a road trip, you can put in your starting position, your ending position, and get sustainable places to stop at along the way. So we're doing both these, and there's two of us. This is a really dumb idea. I will tell you this, why it was dumb at the end. So we got an invitation to apply for a grant for a flash animation, which we won. It was about factory farming. So we worked with a company called Free Range Graphics, and the Free Range people, and I give them full credit, they did the concept on it. But the Free Range people were in their office discussing the issues, and they said, this is so much like The Matrix, and that was just done. So if you have seen The Matrix, you know what I'm talking about. It's an animated spoof using characters from The Matrix that were turned into animals, so Morpheus is Mupheus. And it's an entertaining and palatable way for people to understand issues around farming. What happened was when we launched it, now remember, this is before any social media. There was no Twitter, no Facebook, nothing. There was only email. Our servers crashed twice. We were not prepared for success. And this is one of the things I tell people when I talk is, when you're getting ready to launch something, at least spend an hour or so thinking about potential success and what you might do. Seriously, it took us 6 months just to figure out how to get a flash animation off the internet onto a DVD. That is how old this film is, but it's through Grace Communications Foundation. I don't work there anymore, but what we did through that was we collaborated with a lot of other groups. But when it comes to uncommon collaborations, the one thing that I think was most uncommon is when it came out, I started thinking, the Cannes Film Festival, why not? And we were too late to apply, but we got shortlisted for it, and that started a series of us applying to film festivals. So we got the Matrix and all these film festivals around the country, so an entirely new audience who knew nothing about food issues were able to watch the films through these film festivals. So I think that it's really important when people are doing projects to I hate to say outside the box, because it's so not outside the box to say that anymore, but to think of where can I go with this that's not in the food bubble.
true. Outside the box and strange bedfellows. I was hoping to avoid both of those phrases today.
Well, the other thing, yes, I know. But the other thing about uncommon...
If anyone has better ideas, a shorter form, like a Twitter version of what you can call uncommon collaborations, I would love to know.
Collaborative marketing. So one of the things, Pam brought it up, the collaborative marketing, I'm a marketer, if you don't know, and I do grassroots marketing, and what I do is I take all this very highly educated, really great stuff, and I try to get it out to the public, so I'm not an intellectual like these guys are. I'm more of a, yes, even you are. But what I have found is that working with competition, Pam brought it up, but within the food movement especially, there has been a trend, and now it's basically established, like Change Food, my organization, we work with Food Tank, Jamie Oliver's Food Revolution. We're all looking for ways to come together, to work together, and as one voice, speak out to a larger public. And I think that whole idea of speaking, of working with what would look like a competitor is the way to go in the 21st century.
Can I put a plug in for staying inside the box a little bit?
Sure.
The box with bars.
Bars or bars? I'd rather hang out in the latter, probably. But we just finished up a little bit separately from the work with institutions. We just finished up a 15-month study of food system infrastructure issues and what the barriers are that are preventing local and regional food systems from flourishing really well past farmers markets and CSAs, which are awesome for what they are, but getting into the belly of the food system machine itself, the box, if you will.
Through the institutions, the jails, the hospitals.
Right, well, and just the whole sort of system of aggregation and processing and distribution that moves food around the world. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we found is that one of the big gaps are spaces for long-term collaboration. There are all kinds of hackathons and meet and greets and events that are sort of hallmarks, I think, of the food movement, where people are meeting up in quick hits and quick bites and getting educated and meeting lots of people. But having the opportunity to collaborate over a longer period of time, especially for small business owners that may not have time for a lot of the conversation, they just really need to focus on problem solving for building their businesses. Mm-hmm. One of the ways in the aftermath of having done that research, Ecotrust, in an attempt to sort of create that space in our region, has invested in 2 city blocks. We bought 2 city blocks of Central East Side Industrial District, Portland, and are building this working hub for the regional food economy, where there will be processing and aggregation and distribution facilities and infrastructure, but also space, meeting space, office space, professional services, designed to bring the players in the regional food system that are really reinventing at a regional scale and give them a container, a box, where they can work together and collaborate over time.
To make it easier for them.
Right, so that thing's called the Red on Salmon Street. Thank you. Yay!
You have some fans.
I think over the last years we could really see only the beginning of a fundamental change of the food system. Mm-hmm. If you look at all these urban food initiatives, if you look at all these groups doing urban and peri-urban agriculture, if you look at the new local and also global initiatives working together, we can see that a lot of people see that fixing the problems of our current food system requires new and unconventional collaboration. And it has to go beyond food production. Mm-hmm. I think this was the major problem in the past. We were only looking at yields per hectare, at input-output ratios. We have forgotten completely that there's a cultural dimension of food. Mm-hmm. For many people, culture, landscapes is one of the most important issues related to food. And therefore, if we could go beyond the dollar price per kilogram of beef or per kilogram of grain, and we could look in a holistic way at the food system, we will find out that producing food also means producing landscapes, producing environment. Or, if you don't do it in the right way, pollution, destroying environment. And therefore, having a more holistic view on the food system, I think, is the first step ahead. And we have to bring together all these different local activities together with regional and global activities in order to reformulate our food system. The current food system is undermining the abilities of future generations to feed themselves. And therefore, it's not only a question what kind of food do we want to have, and I really hope one does not have to get to jail before getting good food here in this country. We also have to think what are the needs and aspirations of future generations. And if we bring this together, I think we have a very good foundation of a new food movement.
So it's going to take a lot of ideas from a lot of different sectors to bring all these factors together, because you can't just grow more corn, grow more wheat. You need to think about nutrition, you need to think about culture, and getting everyone engaged. Are you going to say something, Jason?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's heartening to me is that in this collaboration that we're talking about, and I think one of the speakers mentioned it earlier, sustainability and I don't just mean environmental by that, but the sustainability of farmers and food systems and environment systems is being seen as a pre-competitive issue. And I think we're seeing uncommon groups working together, including companies working together. We're working with the hospitality sector, so that includes Hilton, Hyatt, Starwood, Marriott, about food waste, because they've come to realize that nobody stays in a hotel based on their food waste policy. So they can share their data. They can actually learn much faster as a group, have open source databases. So they can actually speed up the learning curve. We're also seeing the same thing with whole sectors, like with cocoa in West Africa, where declining production, aging populations, aging producers, we need to figure out how to replant without deforesting areas. Companies have come together. What's on the table is the brands starting with 10-year contracts to let the traders and the processors walk into banks with those contracts and borrow money at lower rates, and then lend that money out to producers. And on the producer side, paying the farmers a salary for the first 3 years before the trees are actually productive. So I think what's good about this is that we're figuring out how to use the system to change the system. This is not about charity. This is about a long-term systemic change that allows us to respond to things like climate change. In tree crops, we're going to have to replant tree crops every 10 to 15 years with climate change in a lot of parts of the world, or we're going to have to plant different crops because they're not going to be suited. And so we've got to figure out how to make the markets do that, how to do that in a voluntary way. And all of that is pre-competitive. You know, you have Cargill working with Barry Callebaut. You have Olam working with Ecom. This is not easy. If you think uncommon collaboration is NGOs working with companies, that's a lot easier than getting real competitors working together.
Yeah. So when you say pre-competitive, you mean if everyone's on the same page before they start selling it?
I think the realization is that whether you have raw materials, whether you're able to grow the products that are going to feed people, is a pre-competitive issue. How you sell them, the price point, the packaging, the countries you sell in, that's all competitive. But whether there's raw materials available or not is pre-competitive.
So how do you bring those companies together in a room? Does it take somebody like World Wildlife to come in and bring them in a room?
It takes a more neutral party to do that. In fact, that's why we've been asked to help develop a strategy for planting cocoa in West Africa. They've got the pieces of it. They've tried it all individually. It can't be done one company or even one supply chain at a time. It's got to be done systemically. They can't organize themselves. NGOs, academics, other entities can play that role. We talk to people who don't talk to each other. We learn from people and can share ideas. We're what I call extrapreneurs. We actually are like honeybees. We go around and cross-pollinate. We listen, we learn, we teach. We make things happen faster. We create awareness more quickly, build consensus more quickly. That's what the role of NGOs in the 21st century, I think, is becoming. Not doing things, it's influencing things. It's about getting to awareness faster. It's about building consensus more quickly, cutting the time in half, doubling the impact at a quarter of the cost. I mean, this is the kind of efficiency. This is change at the speed of life. This is what we need. Change is happening fast on this planet. We are not.
Alexander?
We also have to ensure transparency and accountability. Not everybody, not every company talking about sustainability is really implementing sustainability. So the question of greenwashing and how to ensure transformation of the current system towards a real sustainable system is a critical issue. And therefore we need all these excellent examples. We have to have the new partnership, but we also have to have transparency, and we have to find indicators and indices to measure that we are really going towards sustainability. To give you an example, currently the big breeding companies are narrowing down the varieties of crops we need to feed future generations. We need more land races in order to adapt to changing climatic conditions. If we don't have an indicator of genetic diversity and biodiversity within our sustainability framework, a lot of these companies will claim we are working towards sustainability, but they're going to do just the opposite. And therefore, we have to have a clear understanding of this transformation process.
So how do you measure that?
And
I don't think it can be done yet. I don't think it can be done yet.
I think it's work in progress on the
Yeah.
one hand. On the other hand, there's something very good. The heads of states and government of all states have agreed on a framework called Sustainable Development Goals, being endorsed in New York in September last year. And now we have to come up with proposals how to transform our food systems into more sustainable systems. And this is not only the environment, it's also the economy and social issues. Our current food system is built on cheap labor. How to ensure that people who are working on farms can really have a decent living. So this requires a fundamental shift, and I think this is the role of NGOs to make very clear, hi, you are talking about sustainability, but you're not doing it.
But I think it's built on more than just cheap labor. I think it's built on throwaway land and environmental externalities that are included in pricing.
Pam?
Yes.
I was just going to jump in and say I agree with many of the points that have been made, and I do think that maybe to put a plug in, the U.S. government takes these issues very seriously, and we do talk a lot, and we are looking at linking the Sustainable Development Goals with our Feed the Future goals, tying that into a global system. I mean, it does ultimately come down, the 800 to 1 billion people that you talk about that are hungry predominantly are in the developing world, unfortunately. And it is a shame that that most of them are small-scale rural farmers who grow food. They don't grow enough food. Or you say, and I agree, a lot of times, a lot of the focus has been on increasing yields. Increasing yields without having a place, an opportunity to get those things into the market, to take advantage of efficiencies, to have capital to be able to grow. I mean, we like to look at small-scale farmers as businesses and take it from there. But if they don't have the essential pieces that they need to grow their business, then where are we going? I would say on the uncommon collaboration, we do a lot of partnering with global companies, smaller, SME type companies, small medium enterprises in the countries in which we're working, and a lot of times we're helping. And my other example I was going to talk about, but we're running short on time, is
I want to get some audience questions.
Yeah, sure. So in Africa the African Union and a number of the G7 donors launched something called the New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition in Africa. And a fundamental premise of that alliance is that no one can do this alone. These food system changes need to be done in collaboration with multiple stakeholders who might not, on the face of it, understand or see how they fit or whether or not they can and whether they want to collaborate. And so we do a lot of work on helping them see those points of shared value and those partnerships. And for us at USAID, it really does come down to where do our development goals and those in the countries with which we work intersect with commercial interests, and so where can we further both at the same time so that it's a win-win. And so anyway, I could go on and on about that, but I won't. But I definitely ultimately agree with you in terms of transparency and accountability, and we're working very hard to build those into the systems.
I just wanted to throw in what's really important to me is greenwashing, and which you had brought up. I think transparency is great. I think these uncommon collaborations are fantastic. I think that there are large companies that really do want to change. There are some that are, but there are some that see it as a way to make more money. If you haven't seen the Tampa Bay newspaper's article about farm to table, Google it right now and read it. You will find out that most restaurants in the Tampa Bay area, and I'm sure this is nationwide, they're actually not telling the truth about how local they are with their food. So that's just one instance of investigative reporters who've uncovered this. So where else is this happening throughout the food system? We need to continue to have advocates and people looking at and keeping people accountable and transparent.
Great. Well, I think we have time to take a few questions now. Is there a mic that comes around, or it's a little bright?
Can I just say
We've
real
got
quick
Gary
while
up.
we're waiting for the
Yes,
mic?
Bill.
You know, just kind of a general comment, and it's really quick. Listening to everybody talk here, you know, we're calling them uncommon collaborations. They're only uncommon because we don't do it enough.
Exactly. Because it's new.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that these don't make sense. And if you take what you're doing and step back, it's really common sense who you should be working with, right? And like Alexander was saying, you know, you look at, you know, a third of the land going to food waste or whatever the percentage was, I forget, and 1 billion hungry people. That doesn't make sense. Who do we need to be working with?
But it makes profit.
Sure.
Right.
But I think we also need to think about what the roles are and how those are evolving. I think for most of the end of the 20th century, NGOs were in competition with or even tried to replace governments or companies. And I think in the 21st century, what we need are NGOs that are actually trying to influence the people that buy and sell, influence the people that make laws and regulations. That's where we started, you know, 55, 60 years ago. Can we get back to that? Because it's that influence rather than doing 1,000 pilot projects or doing 15,000 projects around the world. That's not going to change the world. We have to look at systemic change.
Okay, well, that's why we're all here. Please.
All right, April, I'm Gary Oppenheimer from ampleharvest.org, and this is actually for you. I grew up with National Geographic taking me around the world. How did National Geographic get into discussions on food waste? You've had 2 editions on that.
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting a question for me, but I think that National Geographic has a role to play in the food discussion because everything that we eat in our lives, wherever we live, affects someone else further down the line, whether it's the farmer or the corporation that we bought it from or the grocery store that we bought it from or the, you know, the environment, what kind of things are we doing. So food waste, as Alexander was talking about, is one of the biggest issues that people are just now starting to really click with and understand what our role is. So I think National Geographic wants to be a part of the discussion. If we're talking about preserving the environment, food waste is a big problem for the environment.
You know, Nat Geo's done a lot on illegality of wildlife and species. One of the issues that we have found in our research that's more and more, I don't know if it's more important or just we're more aware of it, is that globally, every commodity we've looked at that's traded globally, 5 to 50% of production is not legal in the country of origin. So you do work on illegality. Let's see a cover story on illegality in the food system. Because it's rampant. It's about,
I'll make a note.
It's about resource rights, it's about labor, it's about other laws, it's about fraud, and it's about corruption. And it's all there equally. It's something for everybody.
Great. Who else? Okay.
Hi, this is Yogesh with Lettuce Networks.
Hi.
A question for Jason. You spoke about the genome project for some of those crops in Africa. Are you familiar with, or is there another resource for general plant genome availability, especially how different plant types or vegetable types respond to different growing conditions and such? So
in addition to mapping the genome of these 100 food crops, we're also mapping how the varieties, I think we're looking at 30 varieties of each, map out as well. This is all being put in the public domain, but there isn't a central repository for this kind of information because mostly genome mapping has been done to own the genome or to own some part of it, and we were deliberately trying to make this all available to people so you couldn't patent it. We've now been asked to do the same thing in the subcontinent in India to come up with the 100 most important food crops there and work with the Beijing Genomic Institute to map them. That's got some politics in it, but I think we're going to actually get that done as well. But hopefully we could start a kind of genome bank in the same way that we have seed banks to make this information available to people.
Right.
I would just add to that, if you're working in the U.S. and at a regional scale, I can highly recommend the Culinary Breeders Network, which is based out of Oregon State University. They are taking plant types from all around the world and working on adaptations, particularly in response to climate change in different regions of the country. So that might be a resource as well.
And MIT has an open agriculture lab that one of our National Geographic explorers actually runs the lab, Caleb Harper, and he's doing a lot with plant breeding and creating ideal conditions so you can grow broccoli anywhere at whatever time, finding out the exact scientific formula to do it. So they're working on open source things like that too.
And a lot of people are looking at drought tolerance as one of the traits they really want to focus on. But the thing that happens with climate change is that it causes more stress. And so then the impact of pests. And so disease resistance is equally important to drought tolerance. And those are the kinds of things that I think this will help open up.
One fascinating footnote to the conversation about broccoli in particular and a lot of the other adaptive breeding kind of conversation in response to climate change is a lot of that work is being done in anticipation that the Central Valley in California is no longer going to be our fruit and vegetable breadbasket. And when they're gone, when it's gone, so to speak, how do we grow food sustainably, durably in other regions of the country? So just the notion that that might not always be there is pretty jarring, I think.
Hopefully future generations will find that jarring too. Was there someone in the back? I'm sorry, hi.
Hi, my name is Sarah Brown, and I'm from a family-owned fruit farm in New York State, and now I live here in DC. I work for the American Farm Bureau. We're an advocacy organization for U.S. farmers and ranchers across the country, organic, conventional, large, small. We kind of speak on behalf of everyone. So I have a kind of a question, kind of a comment. So the intent of all of this is wonderful, and this is what we need to be focusing on, thinking about. What we're seeing and hearing, a lot of these solutions come down to changes in production practices. And whether it's from shifting to more organic, animal agriculture, those changes. And I guess my question is, how can we bring the farmer along without leaving them behind? Because a lot of these previous production practices probably that you're seeing on these farms or with conventional agriculture, they all are happening for a reason. And a lot of these farmers, they want to change and they want to evolve, but the way our markets work and the way trends are working, the way we're exposing things, we don't have time to wait for them. And so, for example, there's very, very, very few family-owned egg farms left in this country. And pretty soon there won't be really any other than your small farmers that kind of do it as a hobby on the side at your local farmers markets. And, again, the intent is good. We're shifting towards cage-free eggs. That's great. But as a result, these family farms are closing because this costs millions of dollars in change in infrastructure. This is happening in a lot of animal agriculture. Also, for example, with organics. My brother runs our farm now, and we used to grow some East Coast test plots for Driscoll's, so it's cool to see they're here. But he would love to switch to organic. Wegmans, everybody knows Wegmans. We've been selling to Wegmans since they started. Our farm's near their first store, and they want organic. Well, my brother would like to grow organic, but in order to make that change, he can't farm those fields for 3 years. What is he going to do for those 3 years? And the problem is these companies aren't waiting. So Wegmans doesn't have time for that. They have customers. You've probably been in their stores here. You've seen how busy they are. So as a result, they don't have time to deal with the smaller family farms, and they're going all to, for example, Driscoll's Organic, which is fine. But these drastic, quick changes are creating that industrial farm, and our farmers want to come along with you. So how can we do that? Because we're forgetting about who's at that core. So I don't know if it's a question or something to keep in mind.
I think I hear what you're saying, Sarah. How do the small farmers stay a vital part of the market without going under?
How can we invest in them, bring them along, make these changes versus just leaving them?
It's a problem I know a lot of people are aware of. There's an organization called Farmland LP. They are actually looking into acquiring land and converting it to organic. There are people who are talking about, paying a farmer for the 3 years during the transition. It's really a matter of who's going to put a stake in the ground and go to a VC fund, and start the company and do it. And we're in sort of the Wild West of food right now because there are billions and billions of dollars coming in. So the only thing I would like to comment on, and maybe I heard you incorrectly, you said that these drastic, quick changes have caused the factory farms. I think it wasn't drastic or quick. Factory farming started since World War II. The industrial agriculture system does not work. It is the farmer who is the one who is taking the brunt of this. We all in this movement need to understand that and need to support farmers more. So, Food Policy Action, they're a DC group. They're trying to work to change policy at the government. People should support them. So the way I see it, it's a collective effort that has to be made. You're spot on about the farmers. I know Paul Willis is here. He's Nyman Ranch. They're doing a lot of good work. So there are people aware of the issue. The Farm Bureau, have them join in to find the solution.
Phil?
Yeah, just a quick comment, and then I'm going to hand it over. I think because Jason and I were talking about this backstage. One of the strange things about being an economist, is that we assume when we're in Econ 101 that the agents know their own constraints and know how to make their best decisions, but then a lot of the policies that end up in place assume that they don't. And I think that gets to one of the points that you were making, is how do we not leave the farmer out of the conversation? And one of the things that myself and my colleagues do try to encourage is that we can learn from the people that we're supposedly trying to help, right? And I'm going to hand it over at that, because there's kind of a lot happened out there.
So one of the things that we were talking about is a growing trend to move away from a focus on practices, better practices, whatever, and more of a focus on what are the results we can live with. Because if you actually ask a farmer, if you give 1,000 farmers the same practice, you'll get about 1,000 different results. But if you say this is the performance level we want, then you will get a lot of farmers using what skills, what resources they have to actually try to achieve that. And you may find 100 ways to achieve that result. But through this process, you don't encourage compliance, you actually encourage innovation. And that's what we need, because whatever is the result we can live with today won't be as good as the one we need tomorrow. Sustainability is about a journey like this. We have to get continuous improvement in here. Moving the bottom of the performance curve actually produces more and reduces impacts more than working with the best producers.
Okay. But Sarah's question also highlights the importance of policies. Let's not forget, the current system is based on 50 years of policies in the developed countries. In Europe and in the United States, a massive amount of state subsidies have spent to make farmers grow. And now the question is how to organize a transition period where family farms can survive and can produce healthy food and consumers can buy it. And therefore we have to talk about a new transition period, also changing policies.
Excellent. I think we have time for maybe one more question, or no?
One very short question. I want to remind you that you have 30 seconds, okay? I'm not kidding. I came in at the end of that last question. 30 seconds.
27.
Okay, so one more question.
Okay. I'm Bill Boatler. I'm with Environmental Shopper, and my question is this. They're talking about small farms, and I think that's an important issue. I've been reading, though, that large companies are buying up huge areas in Africa, South America, and they plan to develop them for agriculture for our part of the world.
What is your question,
My question is, how will this affect the environment? How will it affect the small farmers if this happens?
I think we have to take that outside.
That's a long answer, but you have a quick answer? Okay, 5-second answer.
Nope.
The point you bring up is a good one, and we should talk about it afterwards, but it's not the whole story. There's a lot more going on with land in Africa than foreigners buying up land. There's a lot more consolidation within the country and within the population.
And China's buying land here, if you don't know. So it's not just us in Africa. It's a problem.
A big problem.
We got to go.
All right, thank you to April. Thank you to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you, guys.
Good job.